It was Halloween night, and Mark and his friends were looking for something thrilling to do. They'd heard a legend about an old haunted train ride, the last ride, which only appeared on Halloween night in the small town of Hollow's End. Local tales said the train traveled through the ghostly forest, taking passengers to places they never wanted to see again. Those who returned from the ride were said to be haunted for life, plagued by visions of things they'd seen on board. Against all warnings, Mark and his friends decided to find the train and experience the so-called haunted ride for themselves. They arrived at an abandoned station just before midnight, drawn by the distant echo of a train whistle and the thick fog that blanketed the tracks. It was as if the night itself was alive, urging them forward. The platform was dark and desolate, with only the faint flickering of old lanterns casting shadows across the rotting wood. As the train approached, it had an eerie, old-fashioned look: rusty carriages, faded wood, and broken windows. It looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The doors creaked open slowly, inviting them inside. Hesitating for a moment, Mark and his friends exchanged nervous glances but eventually climbed aboard, their excitement overshadowed by the growing unease settling in their stomachs. Inside, the train was empty. The interior was dimly lit by small, flickering lamps, and it smelled of dampness and decay. As they settled into their seats, they noticed the temperature drop, and their breath became visible in the air. Suddenly, the doors slammed shut, and the train lurched forward. There was no conductor in sight, no other passengers. Just them, in an unsettling silence. The train rolled through the darkness, and soon they were surrounded by a thick, eerie fog that seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. Outside, shapes moved in the mist, faces and figures that looked vaguely familiar. Mark squinted, trying to make out who they were, but each time he focused, the shapes would shift and vanish. After a while, the train began to stop at strange, deserted stations, each more unsettling than the last. At each station, they saw a lone figure standing on the platform, dressed in dark clothes and gazing into the carriage. The figures seemed to recognize them, and each had a ghostly, hollow look, as though they were stuck between worlds. At the fourth stop, a woman with hollow eyes climbed aboard. She sat silently at the back of the carriage, her head down, and as they looked away, she started whispering something unintelligible, a low chant that made their skin crawl. As the train moved on, strange things started happening. Shadows flickered in the corners, and the sound of faint crying echoed through the carriages. Mark's friend Sam swore he felt something cold touch his shoulder, but when he looked back, there was nothing there. As the ride continued, more figures climbed aboard, each with a haunting familiarity, and each bringing an eerie presence. The air grew thick with tension, and no one dared speak, as though their voices would summon something unwelcome. Then, Mark noticed that some of the faces outside looked disturbingly familiar. He saw his late grandmother, a friend who'd passed away years ago, even a childhood pet that had been gone for years. His heart raced as he realized this train wasn't just haunted, it was a bridge between worlds. The passengers, these figures, they were people they had known, lost, and forgotten. Panicked, Mark shouted, "We need to get off this train." But when they tried to move, they found themselves paralyzed, unable to lift their arms or legs. It was as if the train itself was holding them in place. The whispers grew louder, merging into a symphony of sorrowful voices calling their names, each one a reminder of the people they had lost. As the train approached what seemed to be the final station, Mark could see a large, dark figure waiting outside. It was cloaked in shadows, with hollow eyes that stared into his soul. He knew, somehow, that this was the end. The final stop. And that if they didn't leave now, they'd be trapped forever. With one last effort, Mark and his friends fought against the invisible force holding them down. As the doors opened, they threw themselves out of the train and stumbled onto the platform, gasping for breath. the train didn't linger. With a low groan, it pulled away, disappearing into the mist, taking the ghostly figures with it. When Mark looked around, he realized they were back at the abandoned station, just as if they had never left. The fog had lifted, and the station was quiet, as though nothing had ever happened. But the feeling of cold remained, and as they walked away, they couldn't shake the sensation that they were being watched. Every Halloween after that, Mark could still hear the distant whistle of the last ride train, a haunting reminder of the journey that almost claimed them.